Hello, my name is Reese Pugachev, and today I'll be presenting on the purpose of unions. We'll be going over the benefits of unions, unions versus COVID, how they function during the pandemic, and the unions for social work, specifically AUPE, which stands for Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, and what their compensation and benefits usually are, protection and security, and equality in the workplace. Then we'll be moving on to how information technology has influenced professional knowledge, titled The Online Monopoly. And first I'll be defining what professional knowledge really is and what counts as information technology. And then I'll be discussing the rise of e-commerce, and then we'll move on to the recent changes in social work, specifically regarding autonomy, altruism, and power and status. All right, so first off, we've got the benefits of unions. So they're usually pretty good. And from the textbook, Crisis in Canadian Work, the union advantage not only contributes to increased wages and more benefits, but it generally improves the workplace atmosphere and quality of life of its workers. And this is from the chapter on unions. That was page 218. And they elaborate by saying that unions generally give better wages, pensions, and benefits, and safer and more comfortable working conditions. Workers aim to offset the power balance between employer and individual worker, as it would normally be fairly difficult for employers to replace the entire workplace at once. So as unions basically create that unified group in order to give employees more clout. So within that vein, as the textbook as I already quoted, that unions generally give better work hours, and the wages compensated for that. They give higher wages and more consistent wages. It's always regulated rather than it changing based on how many hours you work or what tier you are in the workforce. And especially if the job has to do with tips. And definitely lots of benefits like sick days or grief days or mental health days, sometimes even health insurance, and not that those are always paid, but like sick days, but they do have them at least, so you're allowed to take days off if you're sick. And also better job security. You're more guaranteed to keep your job based on your performance, etc., rather than on a whim of the employer, depending on what that whim might be. So, as it might be kind of obvious, unions are particularly important during the first wave of the pandemic. Like, you sent us lots of articles about nurses walking out and so forth. But I first want to play this TikTok that I found that I think really exemplifies why unions are so important, especially during the pandemic.
What's the most disrespectful thing that's happened to you in the service industry?
I hope you all are ready. This is my villain origin story. I am not joking. At my last restaurant job, I had worked at the restaurant for the entirety of its existence. I had worked my way up from server to floor manager, and I had been like every position in between. during lockdown, it was announced that we were closing temporarily for 2 weeks. And then we had a family fund that you could, like, I donated $1 out of every paycheck to go towards the family fund, which was an emergency fund for employees to apply to if, like, they came upon hard times. So, of course, all of us during the temporary lockdown applied to the family fund because we didn't have any money. And then they announced that my restaurant and 6 others in the small chain were actually closing permanently, and that we couldn't access the funds in the family fund because we were no longer employees. I was supposed to close on a house the next week, and my dad had to co-sign so I wouldn't lose the house because I was no longer employed. One of my coworkers who was 9 months pregnant lost her maternity leave. Another employee lost his house, and 2 employees are no longer alive that worked there. The restaurant reopened this year, and they didn't offer any of us our jobs back. Like, they actually sent us all an email that was like, hey, just so you know, we're reopening, but we're not giving you your job back. The restaurant is run by a billionaire whose brother is also a billionaire who was recently the host of SNL and owns a car company. Don't eat there.
All right, so that was quite the story, and boy, does that suck. I want to clarify that, yes, in most countries, a situation like that would definitely be grounds for a lawsuit. But as the person stated, they had no money, so that was probably not on their mind or something that was quite difficult to do, as lawsuits and filing lawsuits generally cost money, and whether or not you might be compensated for that in the end, or if you're sure you're going to win, that doesn't matter. You still need to pay the lawyers. So yeah, again, I really resonated with this story because I don't think it's an uncommon circumstance, and I think that a lot of businesses did this in order to avoid paying their employees any compensation or sick days or anything like that, just straight up firing them instead of letting them be laid off or anything like that. And that way, that also ensures that the employees will not be able to get benefits from the government unless, like, something like CERB that happened. So, again, that was a very difficult situation they were in, and I'm glad they got out of it, but still. So, what the functions of unions during the pandemic? Unions would make sure that that situation never happened. They would make sure that sick days were allowed, like if you caught COVID, you were allowed to quarantine yourself and not go to work. And most importantly, you would have continued employment after you were allowed to get back to work after, quotes, the pandemic, if that's a thing, which it's not. And you wouldn't, like, if you were laid off due to the pandemic and the business had to shut its doors, then a union would be able to give you that paperwork and be able to give you the information necessary to get employment insurance, whatever that might look like, CERB or literally EI, whatever it was. And another one is you also have a right to your health, a bit like workers' compensation, being injured at work. The pandemic certainly fit into that. So if you did have to go to work and your employer required that you do so, then you could insist on specific regulations like wearing a mask or social distancing or safety measures like the plastic walls that we have everywhere now. you could have insisted on that before the regulations were in place by the government. A union would have helped you negotiate something like that, and it might even have helped you negotiate compensation for working during the pandemic, because that's considered a risk of, like, you're literally risking your life. So unions help you, again, advocate for you on your behalf in order to gain those benefits. So moving on to a social work union and how which unions it was. So this took a bit of research. I ended up actually having to call a few organizations and ask. Apparently, simply Googling it, I was not able to find a proper union that was specifically for social work, or if social workers were usually unionized. Again, it was pretty general. um, but eventually, I did find an answer. So it depends whether or not the social worker is working for the government or for a nonprofit. Rarely for a for-profit organization. Nonetheless, if it was for a nonprofit, they usually weren't unionized, and I imagine that has to do with the cost of a union. So, and a lot of the time for a nonprofit, it's usually not necessary because they already have like really good regulations and stuff and benefits, because of all people they should know. um, so I think it mostly though has to do with cost, and there might be a legality in there somewhere as well. I'm not sure. But if you are lucky enough to be working for the government, you will probably be under the AUPE, which is Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. So all this information I got from a copy of an agreement between the Benevolence Care Center and AUPE. This was written in 2019, and I believe it had an expiration date for March 2021 or something like that. So a couple years. So some of the benefits that that AUPE members were able to get were, if you were a regular employee that worked at 20 or more hours per week, you were eligible for the benefit plans. And let me take a note here. 20 hours isn't a lot. In retail, that's usually considered part-time employees. And for some reason, in this particular one, part-time employees were even less than that. So I found that really interesting. Usually for retail, full-time work is 35 hours a week. And part-time was, I believe, 20 or 30, and then casual was anything under than that. So as you go down the tier, the less benefits you get, because essentially you can't pay the union as much, I imagine, or something like that. Anyway, so for regular employees that happen to work at the Benevolent Care Center, you would get life benefits like accidental death and dismemberment, dependent life, long-term disability, health benefits like prescriptions, extended health care, vision care, survivor benefits, emergency travel stuff, employee and family assistance program, dental, even vision care was in there. If I already said that, I'm sorry. And I already said that. Okay. But yeah, so basic health benefits for sure. As my only experience with unions was in retail, so these already sound a lot better. But as far as I remember, the health benefits don't usually go very far. But in this case, I believe it went to about 70% in the healthcare. Um, so for things like prescription drugs and um, vision care and stuff like that, anything that was like technically covered by the Alberta government, but it would extend beyond that. As to protection and security, so again, job security, so something like a leave of absence, which is basically when you book days off in advance. So say you want Christmas off or something like that, that would count as a leave of absence. So, however, a lot of the time you're not allowed to do it on a straight up holiday, which it says in this section as well. But what I think is important is that approval shall not be unreasonably denied. And I thought that was important to point out because even though the agreement states that the primary commitment of the employee is to the employer, and that leaves of absence are subject to approval of the employer, I still think it's important that if they will not be unreasonably denied is there, because sometimes they don't always give you a really good reason. Sometimes they just don't want to redo the schedule, and sometimes they don't want the trouble of finding someone else, or sometimes, I don't know, they just don't want to do it. They're lazy or something. So, and again, like if you have, like, if you want to file a complaint about that sort of thing as an employee, you're allowed to do that. Like if you think that it was unreasonably denied, you can say so because your union will fight for you. Of course, that's only if you're right. But again, having somebody who's in your court really, really helps. I think that's not just for these literal circumstances, but also simply to have that state of mind. It's kind of a load, a mental load off to know that somebody's in your court. It's not just you versus the employer, and that's that. Or rather, you versus employment. Sometimes it's straight up, that's all it is. And then equality in the workplace. And I found that this usually translated to respect in the workplace and anything against discrimination. So this generally follows the human rights law that Canada has. I forget what it's called, Bill C. Something. I don't remember. But it's exactly on discrimination. So it lists, just as the union does, discrimination, harassment, bullying, violence, restriction, or coercion exercised or practiced in respect of any employee by either party by reason of age, race, color, creed, national origin, political or religious belief, gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, marital status, physical or mental disability, nor by any reason of membership or non-membership or activity in the union, nor in respect to an employee's or employer's exercising any right conferred under this agreement. So I summarize that as the union and employer agree to respect and dignity in the workplace and support a policy of no tolerance for anything, this discrimination and any violence or harassment, any of the like. And I really liked their process for if you did want to file a complaint of discrimination or harassment, because they have ways, like if you're not comfortable directly confronting the person that's doing the discrimination and everything, you can just go to your immediate supervisor or department head or human resources, and you can talk to them about it, basically. Though they do say that it's the employee's responsibility to document the incident. And to be fair, I will say that usually when discrimination happens, you don't really realize it until it's over, especially those of us who are used to it. So documenting it, you kind of have to wait for it to happen again, sort of thing. And it's at that point where you have to, in this day and age, whip out your phone if you're allowed it, and hit record and the like. In retail, you're not always allowed your phone on the floor, though everyone does it anyway. So that can be a hindrance to that. Or witnesses are important too. Anyway, so once you submit it, regardless of what it is, the employer is under obligation to investigate it, and it has to be concluded within 90 days, or it goes straight to the union, and then the union handles it from there. And there can be no retaliation from the accused, which I really liked as well. They can't take any kind of disciplinary action if they happen to be within a position of authority in the workplace. So again, I thought that process was pretty good and also fairly standard as far as I know, and have experienced personally. So in terms of social work, I think that all three of these are really important, as health benefits, especially mental health, are probably really important for social workers. As they go through enough as it is. And job security and protection versus leaves of absence or sick days and the like. That's all really important, especially, again, with the pandemic. That really exemplified the kind of problems that arise if you don't have a union. And more so, equality. So that kind of, again, having somebody in your court that you know will fight for you if you feel uncomfortable or like somebody's harassing you or discrimination. I think that that's really important, and again, a mental load off. And I'm sure that social workers especially appreciate that, because they will get harassment and discrimination not just from fellow employees, but also from the clients and folks that they deal with. So, being a social worker is a dangerous career for sure. So unions are really, really necessary. All right, so moving on to online monopoly. Now, I know kind of what was meant by this option, but I wanted to clarify exactly what professional knowledge means, because I think that's important, because in this day and age, sometimes it can be hard to define what exactly professional knowledge is in a world where knowledge is so accessible and so compiled in such a form that you could essentially take a free course in anything you wanted. There isn't as much as a paywall as maybe there once was. So specifically, and this is defined by in the Credo reference under the title Knowledge Work, which they pulled from SAGE. And they stated that, in essence, knowledge work entails the deployment of complex and technical skills in areas such as consulting, scientific research, computing, and strategic planning, where expert knowledge is used to undertake relatively complex problem-solving work and thereby enhance the final output. So, in that vein, you could put quite a few different careers, and you could even put retail in there, because complex problem solving, let me tell you, that's a lot. um, it might not be, doing a whole bunch of math problems, but working with people and uh, analyzing the situation and doing that kind of emotional labor does take a certain amount of um, education, especially if you plan on doing it well. So, that is something that most employers will train you in. But I think in this case, we're referring to more complex um, careers and workplaces. So, exactly what they said. So, technical skills or strategic planning or expert knowledge. So, I think that falls under more of education and uh, technology, like the IT services or computer science, that sort of thing. um, so now that we kind of know what professional knowledge is, so information technology. Uh, so this is from the Collins Dictionary of Sociology under the entry Information Technology, parentheses IT. So they say that this information technology is a general term applied to all computer-based technologies of human communication. Office automation is the most widely implemented form of information technology and has major implications for the organization and experience of clerical work. Information technology underpins the flow of information within and between organizations and societies, giving rise to increasing dependency on global networks, including the internet. So, what does that all mean when you put it together? So, how has the rise of information technology affected professional knowledge and professional careers? So, something that the textbook mentions, which I thought was pretty interesting, um, is about when Target closed across Canada. And I just wanted to kind of go on a tangent here and say that I actually had personal experience with that. Not directly exactly. I wasn't an employee of Target, but it was one of the reasons why I got, I don't know, laid off or quotient. I'll get to it. So, once upon a time, I lived in Calgary. I worked at Zellers in Marketplace, and it was a fairly good job, in my opinion. I really liked working there. I liked the people there. It was boring as hell, but I didn't have to deal with as many customers as usual. And when I did, it was fairly easy. A lot of the customers that came to Zellers were pretty nice. There weren't a huge lot of blow-ups or anything, and I was able to walk around. I wasn't stuck behind a till, or I wasn't forced to work in one particular section. I could go to all the departments, which I really appreciated, because if I got tired of folding clothes, I could just go to shoes and organize them there. Or my favorite department to work in was electronics, actually. Um, but ever so slowly, I got less and less hours. And um, it would get to the point where I had maybe 4 hours, like between two shifts, a week. And when it got to that point, I finally said, you know what, fine. Like, if you want me to quit, just say so. Um, or, like, just fire me. It's easier. Um, but yeah, that's what they do, though. That's something they do to kind of push you away without, and force you to quit without actually doing it themselves. Um, Either because they're reluctant to, or because they don't want to go through the paperwork of saying you're laid off. They're just trying to say that, oh no, you quit. You're the one who wanted to leave, not us. Um, so I remember that once I did finally quit, it wasn't even a few months later where everybody else that I had worked with got laid off, or had to apply to Target because that was the new store that was coming through. So I don't know exactly if they were laid off or if they were all pushed away like I was. I know at least one employee probably would have stayed there until the end. Um, but yeah, so that was quite a shock for sure, because that let go a lot of people, and pushed them away the same way that I was. And there was no guarantee of employment at Target. You had to apply there like any other job. So then, like, Zellers was liquidated, and then Target came in, and like that's all over a course of a few months, because you can't just set up shop that quickly. um, and yeah, so they employed most, I believe, of the Zellers employees. But because I was already gone and I was not interested in traveling that long anymore, and I was also moving on with my career, I decided not to go back. Um, but yeah, so then when Target finally left, that was like what? It was not even a year that they were there. Like, what was it? Yeah, they said 26 months. All right, so like 3 years. Um, or two and a bit years, um, which is not long. So I don't know why they bothered if they knew it was going to be that bad. Um, and yeah, it was a hole in there for a while. A lot of those employees had to go elsewhere, and not a lot of them were able to, because that was a department store in a mall. And if you don't want to work in a mall store itself and you just want to go to another department store, well, you were kind of out of luck. And yeah, so yeah, it did leave a big hole. But in a place like Calgary, there's always another place. The only problem is transportation. So a lot of the ones that took public transportation, I imagine they found it much more difficult to get a job that was like not 2 trains and 2 buses away, which, by the way, can take up to 4 hours of your day, and that sucks. Um, and yeah, so I just wanted to have that little sidebar there, that that did personally affect me for a little while. Um, so in that vein, though, the rise of e-commerce. So one of the reasons that um, professional knowledge is being pushed away, or maybe gained in a way, as online sales, according to the textbook, were at 6% of all retail spending in Canada in 2013. And I wanted to get a more recent number, and I found oh, excuse me, um, from Statistics Canada, The Daily, an article titled Retail Trade, December 2020. So, of course, I'm sure we all remember that um, e-commerce and online purchasing went through the roof during the first wave of COVID and is still probably growing, um, as that report in fact stated that not only was it at 7.8% at that time in December 2020, but also that based on other seasonal effects, and it would be increased by another percent, another 1.1%. And some sources that I found even said that it was up to 10% now. And frankly, that's a lot in terms of retail. It's certainly enough that some businesses have integrated online purchasing. So, for example, restaurants were often forced to go to Skip or Uber Eats in order to have a delivery system that would basically do it for them, even if that cost them a lot of profits. Um, and or Some companies had to revamp their website or actually make one and again install basically online purchasing. So that required somebody who knew computers to be employed, right? Um, However, likely that would have been on a freelance or project contract based, so their employment would have been quite limited. Literally, once they were done, they would have shoved them out the door. Um, so, on one hand, I want to say that information technology has changed the world of professional knowledge. It has introduced a new field of professional knowledge. Um, on the other hand, it also makes professional knowledge a lot more accessible to everyone, regardless of their previous education. So if you, say, don't want to go to university for computer science or IT services, then there are a million courses online where you can learn programming languages, where you can learn um, like commands. Sorry, I forget what they were called. I took like one computer science course. It's where you learn how to talk to a computer at a very base level, um, writing programs and the like. Um, and so you kind of learn how to write, again, that code language in order, all these abbreviations of things and different words in order to create a file and in order to do any action that you do on a computer, um, just basically in text mode. Um, so there are ways to learn that all online. There's no need to take a university course or even go in for a certificate and the like. Um, a lot of the times, too, a lot of these free websites can give you a kind of certificate. The only problem that you would likely come up against is there's no formal certificate or degree that the internet can just give you. Hey, you watched so and so crash course videos and you are now certified to do this. That would never happen. Please don't. Um, but that still makes it so that a lot of employees will have a diverse set of skills that can be translated into the workplace. And though that said, again, with a lack of certification, that can be difficult to put on your resume if you don't know the right language to use. For example, if you, oh, this is really showing my age. If you were back in LiveJournal days, which was an online blog that was really popular once upon a time, and you organized a uh, it's an event for writers essentially to write under a specific subject. So sometimes there was holiday themes one like Christmas, where you would pick a certain prompt if you were a writer, and then you would write on that prompt and submit it to this event. It wasn't for any kind of prizes. It was literally just an event that would run, and that would be your inspiration. Um, and if you happen to be one of the people that organize those events, then that is 100% something you can put on your resume, but you need to know how to word it. You can't just say, I, especially since a lot of these events were usually pretty explicit, um, you had to say, something other than I organized an online event for, thousands, if not millions, of writers to participate in. And I made sure that it was all at the right time, that when, it opened, it would be at a specific time to go across time zones, all that kind of stuff. Um, so again, information technology certainly has changed our world. So, moving on to changes in social work. So we're going to be talking about autonomy, altruism, and power and status. So a lot of these, especially autonomy and altruism, I think, are kind of topics I covered in previous assignments, especially the last one, topic 4, regarding autonomy. And I would say that social workers have very poor autonomy because they are often tied by government and company policies and regulations, or simply literal limits to how many people they can take in to a specific shelter or something maybe, or who they can provide their services to, or budget limitations, all kinds of things. Um, and if autonomy has changed due to the pandemic, I would say that it is fairly temporary, because, and likely to change back to what it was, because the pandemic has aggravated certain risky situations and situations that social workers often deal with. So it's more likely that they feel their lack of autonomy now more than ever, as our government continues to ignore flaws in our society and economy and the government itself, that were, again, aggravated by the pandemic and made significantly worse. So, in that vein, what does altruism look like in social work? So, the very nature of social work generally means that you're pretty altruistic. You care a lot about other people, and you are fairly selfless, since you want to help people so badly, and you've been educated in how these problems have come about, more or less, and how to deal with them, more or less, in the best way that you can. So, again, always looking for the betterment of someone else, and they receive very little in return. Um, though they are, of course, paid to do their work, it is usually expected that social workers are the type of people to be satisfied simply by helping people, or on occasion not. Because, again, like I said, the pandemic has aggravated a lot of situations. So things like altruism is probably even harder to do when you're already overwhelmed, and you simply can't just add that one other person or 10 other people, however it may be. And I wanted to say that if altruism is an aspect that has changed in social work, then perhaps if they didn't already know before, social workers might have realized the shortcomings of certain policies, especially regarding sick days or isolation and like a workplace safety and that sort of thing. And also probably made them all even more susceptible to burnout and being overworked because, again, of those aggravated problems and trying to help more and more people than they were probably normally capable of. So then let's go to power and status. So I would say that the status of social workers waxes and wanes with politics. It very much depends on not just government policies and politics, but also our culture, how we currently view social workers and how in demand they are, and being educated on what exactly they do, what they don't do. So, and again, because it waxes and wanes all the time, and being under, public service means that they get a lot of their funds from the government. So if the government suddenly decides to take that away, then that power and status is gone too. So I imagine that social workers are in much the same situations as a lot of other public services, like the medical field, nurses and such in Alberta, who are caught between being extremely needed and laid off because apparently when their services are too needed, the government is unwilling to pay them or to provide funds for any specific services. So that's fun. All right, so the importance of unions are certainly, if this entire presentation hasn't already made it obvious, unions are extremely important for the rights of workers, and I really like the way the textbook put it here. Unions represent workers' historical attempts to share control over the conditions of their employment and to protect themselves from competition, some pressures of the market, and employers' unfettered power. I really like that last bit there, unfettered power, because that's exactly what it is. The employer holds all of the cards in between the employee and the employer, because either you want to get paid and you do what they say, or you don't get paid and they force you to quit, or you quit yourself because you can't take it anymore, or etc., etc. So I've attempted to strike a balance between the two and to put more power in the employee's hands by affecting the employer in ways that they are unable to ignore, like walking out or strikes and the like. And in addition, signing those agreements between employer and the union, such as the AUP that I read out, that all is able to be written out and on paperwork and signed and sent off. And if it's violated in any way, then that can be taken to court, and that's all really, really important. And it can be on the employee's behalf, and it means that you don't necessarily have to pay all those costs, which is really nice. So I believe that's the last of it. Here are my references, and I hope that you really enjoyed that, and I will see you next time.